And we are back, Daru Strong Podcast, episode number 46. I'm your host, Phil Daru. Today we have on again, Evan Peikon. Evan's going to talk about Moxie, and he has on with him the owner, CEO, and founder, Roger Schmitz. He's going to talk about what this Moxie is going to do for the athletes to help them get into the optimal position and increase their performance by understanding rate limiting factors. Now, before we do that, I have to shout out my sponsors, Athletic CBD. Now, Athletic CBD is a non-GMO and it's non-pesticides. It also has a bunch of different non-intoxicating ingredients on there, but you definitely want to make sure you check it out, athleticcbd.com. If you have any bruises, any soreness, anything of that nature, go ahead and check it out. You can use my discount code Daru at the final checkout, 4% off. If you're looking to enhance your coaching ability, if you're looking to learn some of the methods, the protocols, the systems that I use to help my athletes get in the best performance possible, go ahead and check out my mentorship program and coaching course. Link is in the description. I go over all the details on what I actually do with my athletes to get them to where they need to be. It's a one-time fee and you get access for life. And there's constantly new information going in there. And I'm also bringing in people that I trust that are very smart, people like Evan, that are going to go over things that are going to help you as an athlete or coach to get you to where you need to be. So please go ahead and check it out. Also, if you're looking to train some of my programs that I have online right now, we're talking Fight Ready, Heavy Hitter, Ground Control. We also have Body Armor, which is an 8-week body weight only program. If you are on lockdown or you can't make it to a gym, go ahead and check it out. It's an 8-week body weight only program that you will get into the greatest shape of your life. Trust me, I guarantee it. This is something I use. This is something I had some of my athletes use when I couldn't train them in the gym, and we got tremendous results with it. And on top of that, everybody else around the world that we've actually been able to give this to has had tremendous results too as well. So check it out, Body Armor. And also, if you're looking to work into my own off-camp program, if you are a fighter or someone who wants to train like a fighter, go ahead and check out Fight Dominance, which is a complete application or app that you can get on your phone, and you'll get weekly and daily workouts from that overall app. So we partnered up with Train Heroic. Go to Train Heroic, or you can go to my website, darustrong.com, sign up for that and get weekly workouts catered to you so that you can be in the best position possible to when either you start a fight or you just want to get in the best shape of your life. Check it out now. Let's get on to the interview.
Welcome to the Daru Strong Podcast. Daru Strong Podcast.
Let's go. Mind over matter. Put your mind somewhere else and keep going. That little voice in your head is trying to stop you from getting to where you want to be. Be successful and keep moving forward.
With your host and world-renowned strength and conditioning coach, Phil Daru.
And thank you so much for joining me. I have Evan Peikon and Roger Schmitz. That's how you say your name, right? Schmitz?
That's right. Yep.
I got it. So I want to talk to you guys about Moxie. I know me and Evan have talked before on an earlier podcast, but let's go ahead and, Evan, before we start, I want you to go over just a quick bio of what you've done in the field and what you're doing now as far as research for Moxie and also just overall.
Yeah, so to quickly touch on some of the main points we talked about last time. So right now, primary jobs are,
There you go.
got the phone going. So I'm a coach and researcher. I've been using the Moxie for about 6 years or so now. Mm-hmm. Over the years, I've presented on some different concepts ranging from using Moxie, testing and training CrossFit athletes, to using it for hypertrophy training and bodybuilders, all the way up to using it in a comprehensive load management process. So over the years, I've been using Moxie and other technologies, both as a coach and a researcher, trying to study the body in different ways. And more recently, the primary thing that I'm working on is modeling time to exhaustion, and Moxie has been a big part of that as well.
Gotcha. And Roger, can you explain to me, who you are and what you do for Moxie itself?
Yep. So I'm the inventor of the Moxie technology, and I'm the CEO of the company. So I started this up in about 2013. We started selling our first units, and Moxie is it's a sensor that athletes wear, and it measures oxygen levels in their muscles while they're working out. And then trainers like Evan use that data to optimize performance. So that's kind of what we've been focused on with the company since we launched it.
Nice. So all right, that's good. I wanted to back up a little bit here because there's a lot of people that don't know what Moxie actually does, right? So Evan, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you a little bit. Can we talk a little bit about, I know that we talked about it last time, but let's reiterate on the fact of like energy system training and what most people are getting wrong and why we are starting to utilize something like a NIRS or Moxie to help distribute or help with our training progressions.
Yes, I think taking it way back, I know a lot of people in the fight game, particularly coaches, are going to be familiar with like Joel Jamison's Ultimate MMA Conditioning. That was huge years back.
I got the book right. Man, I got the book right here for you, man. You know what? This is the throwback book here. Look at that.
So anyone that's read the book knows you'll start flipping through it and you find a section inevitably that kind of breaks down different energy systems into categories. It tells you if you're, I don't remember the exact details off the top of my head, but if you're working from 0 to 10 seconds, it's alactic anaerobic training. And then 10 seconds to 20 seconds is anaerobic power. And then all of a sudden, when you get past maybe 2 minutes, then you're doing aerobic training. What becomes really jarring to a lot of coaches, you hear this story told by many people across many domains, is they put a Moxie on and they hop on a bike and they do a sprint and they see oxygen depleting instantly. And a lot of times my first reaction was, this device doesn't work because oxygen's not supposed to be used right now. I have a biochemistry background. I was taught this in school. So of course this device doesn't work. It's not until you actually realize that a lot of the textbooks were written 20, 30 years ago, and that we can look at bioenergetics through more of a contemporary lens, that we could acknowledge that all these energetic processes that we're familiar with are all still occurring, but that time frame is milliseconds versus seconds to minutes to hours. So the second we start an activity, oxygen is going to be utilized rapidly. And if it's utilized at a greater rate than it's supplied to the tissue, you would see muscle oxygen saturation decreasing. So already this really starts to hijack a lot of coaches' paradigms about how we train athletes, because if oxygen is always utilized and always part of that energy transduction process, and we could even blow it out further and say lactate is always used as a fuel source as well. So now we could say that all training is aerobic and all training is lactic. So instead of thinking in these confined terms of I'm doing anaerobic training today, or I need to improve my aerobic power, instead we could focus on what are the limiting systems in this individual. So if I'm working with a mile runner or fighter, I wouldn't say you're limited by your lactic endurance or your anaerobic power. I would say you are limited by your cardiovascular system's ability to get oxygenated blood to your working muscle. That's a more practical paradigm for me as a coach, because if you're limited by your anaerobic power, what do I do for you? Do I just have you do 20-second sprints every day? Versus if I know you're limited by your cardiac output, well, that's something I know how to deal with as a coach or a physiologist. So we could really change our paradigms. And in my opinion, it's been a game changer for me, because it's allowed me to really identify and isolate my athletes' limiters and then have really practical tools for dealing with those.
Yeah, that allows you to streamline the training process and, again, maximize your time efficiency. You know, with that, I think that for most part, especially with fighters and, you know, I have a large amount of combat sport athletes and coaches that listen to this podcast, you know, our main goal is to get the job done that we need in very limited time. So I think with a device like this, and this is why I wanted to bring you both on, is because I wanted people to understand how vital not only understanding your rate limiting factors, but how you actually can do that, you know, and we've done it, you know, we had the speed preservation that we talked about, Evan, on the last podcast. But for this is like a very straight line approach to what we need to do, you know, I guess you've seen tremendous results with it. I'm actually excited. I'm actually going to run myself through it on Tuesday. So I need you gentlemen to kind of put me through it a little bit, or let me know how to do it. And then we'll see how it goes, but definitely excited. Now with, Evan, so with the Moxie, what why is it so important, right? And how is it going to optimize our performance? As far as just the test itself and then utilizing it, for training purposes.
Yeah, so those are going to be two sides of the same coin in a way. One of the things that you find when you start using a technology like Moxie is every training session that you do is actually a form of assessment. Mm-hmm. So as coaches, when we're writing workouts down, we have some idea of what we want an athlete to get out of the workout. Mm-hmm. And I found, at least for myself, maybe it's because I'm bad at predicting what my athletes' responses are going to be, but I'll write a workout for one of my clients and I'll have a specific goal adaptation in mind. Then we'll pop their Moxie on and we'll have them do the workout. And a lot of times we find that what I think is going to happen in that workout isn't actually what's happening in live time. Yeah. So rather than just telling an athlete, hey, do this workout anyway, and we'll triage a day or two later, we could adjust the workouts on the fly to make sure people are actually getting the adaptations that we want to. Gotcha. But even past that, we could determine how much volume is really effective. If I'm working with a middle distance runner and I plan on having them do 2,200 meter repeats today, mm-hmm. Well, at a certain pace, of course. Well, I'm picking that number 20 based on some kind of heuristic, but what if on that day they could only handle 14 work sets, mm-hmm. and I'm just going to smash them with those next 6? Those extra 6 sets are going to drive fatigue more, but they might not be necessary to get us the stimulus that we're looking for. Or the flip side, what if they actually need 24, 25 sets to get enough of a stimulus? Yeah. That's something that we can't really know when we're writing that workout or planning it. But using something like a Moxie could give us some indications of what that amount of that maximum recoverable volume is on that given day. And it allows us to kind of change things on the fly. And also, like you said, understanding what an athlete's limiter is, so we know where to focus our attention. Unlike you, I work with CrossFit athletes. My guys have 36 things that they need to work on any given week. So the more surgical I could be with actually understanding which of these factors is important for their performance, the better. So we could just spend less time in the gym, or at least spend our time more strategically and not train things that might not actually make our performance better.
Okay. Now, Evan, this is one thing I did want to ask you, right? Because what I think about programming this, right? And I'm looking at those limiting factors. Am I really going to streamline that limiting factor? Am I going to work on that? Like for me, right? I have in camp, out camp, right? Off camp, or whatever you want to call it. When they're not in camp, do I want to solely work on their rate limiting factors and improve upon that so that there is no gaps? And then on the flip side to that, do I want to work on their strengths of what they actually use a lot inside the fight, getting closer to the fight and make it more specific to the energy systems of the fight itself?
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is taking, you could call it like a vertical integration approach if we want to use like traditional track and field terminology, but I always think of it like a guitar amp. When you're playing guitar, you're not going to turn like treble all the way up and turn bass all the way down, or turn gauge all the way down. All of those dials are going to be turned on to some extent. Mm-hmm. So we're just manipulating the volume or how much we're turning on each of those knobs. So when we're working with an athlete, for me, I want to train all qualities that are relevant for my athlete's sport at all times of the year, because I'm really greedy and I want to do everything. Yep. But what identifying the limiters allows us to know is, how do we prioritize things within this training program? Because for me, it doesn't make sense to only train the limiter, because an athlete's not going to fail when their limiter gives out. One of the other things you notice when you use Moxie or using any technology is people rely on compensation patterns. So when their limiter gives out, they start relying on every compensation pattern or strategy they have to keep themselves going. And once they run out of effective compensation strategies, that's when they fail. So of course I want to take care of the limiter. It's like raising the ceiling up, but I also need to make sure, because I know in any event, the limiter is going to fail. If you push yourself hard enough for long enough, that's giving out. I want to make sure that they have a backup plan and their physiology could cope with that when it comes down to the event. So it's just a matter of prioritization. It's not a black and white thing where we're either training the limiter or we're training the strengths. We want to train everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can always undulate the compensators and the limiters based upon the weeks and things of that nature, and consolidate the stresses based upon what they actually need or what they're weakest at. So that makes a lot of sense, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Evan is like he's my mentor now, so good job. Roger, let's get to you, man. Listen, those rosy cheeks, man. Look at you. You're ready to go.
Yeah, I was just outside putting a battery in my daughter's car.
Were you really? Where are you at right now?
West of Minneapolis. So it's about
okay.
It's about 8 below. So we had to. She needed a new battery. It's outside. So I'm still red. I'm still red from that.
I bet, man. And guess what? I'm in Florida, and it was hot as shit. Just this recently out there. So you guys can come on to Florida whenever you're ready. I know everybody else is.
I'd love to do that, especially today.
Nah, no problem. So Roger, talk to me about Moxie, man, and why is it, like, for me, I feel like it's the gold standard of NIRS device, and why would somebody want to choose this product over anything else?
So it's as far as, NIRS has been around for a while. Before Moxie existed, it was around as medical devices, and Moxie was really the first NIRS device that was built for athletes. So in the past, the devices were like, the size of a VCR or something, and they had a cable that would attach to the patient. And then when I came up with Moxie, or I came up with the idea for building it, I eliminated a lot of the expensive optics, but I was actually able to make it more accurate in the process. And the really nice part is it's much more rugged. You can drop the sensors and they still work. So it's a precision measurement device, but it'll take a beating. And so that's actually how I got into the fitness space. I was looking at applications for the technology, and I was actually meeting with a doctor, and we were talking about using it with heart failure patients. And he says, "Oh, that's cool," but he says you should make it for athletes because that's a group that could really take advantage of the technology. So that's kind of why we got going in this space. Yeah,
it's gonna need to take a beating, man. I'm gonna have guys spar with this thing on, so it's gonna be good, right?
We have motocross riders put it on their they put it on their forearms when they go over the washboard bumps. So yeah, it's tough. That's
sure, man. So how did you and Evan meet? And now he's a part of the company. I assume he's working a lot with Moxie. Yep. How did you find Evan, and obviously what does he do for you guys now?
We must have met like 6 years ago. I think you said earlier. It was about then, and I think it was probably through the Jürg Feldman forum that Evan found us. So we when we first started this, I'm an engineer. I make the device. The analogy I give is I'm like the airplane mechanic, but you don't want me flying the plane. So Evan flies the plane. I make the hardware. But we were working with Jürg Feldman. He had some ideas on using this technology for training athletes, and he was presenting that on our forum. And I think that's probably where Evan found us originally. Evan ended up getting some of his own sensors, and then Evan presented at one of our. We have these summits from time to time where some of our more experienced users get together and share ideas, because this is all new. This really wasn't available for athletes previous. The devices were $15,000, and they weren't waterproof, they weren't sweat proof. It just wasn't practical to use it with athletes. And so the science has really been developing. And so Evan was one of the early people that got in on that, and started with Jürg, and then has just really run with it and developed these ideas through all the training he's done. Yeah,
it looks great. Like, he's got a briefcase. I brought me a briefcase, so it looks like I got some money in there. But definitely looks like a bomb, so it's going to be hard for me to get on a plane with it, like you talked about. So how do you use this technology? Like, how do we set it up? How is it effective? And can we use it, like, for us, we're trying to use it, for sparring. We're trying to use it for bag work. We're also trying to, do it to a degree of, like, all right, we know how we can put it on an individual, especially for me in combat sports, for fighters. I want to measure while they're doing their sport. So how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, so that's one of the breakthroughs with the technology, is that you can measure while they're doing the sport. So we measure on hockey players on the ice, and we want to measure while you're sparring. We don't want to put you on a bike and measure you that way, because that's not the same. It's a different sport. It's a different thing. So the sensors are worn over a large working muscle usually. That if you're going to wear one sensor, we usually go over what it would be the main the main power producing muscle for the movements that you're doing. It's common to wear multiple sensors. You might measure left and right to look at asymmetries, and you might measure on lower priority muscles to get some more systemic responses. And then the sensors, we need to attach the sensors somehow. We often use tape to attach the sensors because we don't want to encircle the limb. We don't want to wrap something around the limb and cut off blood flow to the limb. The sensor will still work, but you've put a tourniquet on the limb, and it's really easy to get it too tight. So we don't want to do that. So we often tape the sensors on, or if the athletes are wearing compression clothing, we just tuck it under their compression clothing. And then the sensors send the data out wirelessly. So the athlete is wearing these sensors, and they're pretty small. They're just yay big or so. And they often forget they have them on. And then it sends data out wirelessly, and the kit you have, the data will get picked up by a computer, and then you can see a live graph of the data. So the trainer can be watching, at the side of the rink or whatever, and be seeing the data live as the athlete's doing the workout. You can see when the fatigue sets in, you can see when they're recovering, all of that you can see in real time.
Gotcha. So Evan, how have you been able to utilize this in your own field? I know you work a lot with CrossFit athletes. Can you explain a little bit more to that?
Yeah, so over the years, the different applications I've used Moxy for has really grown in numbers. So years back when I first started using the technology, I was almost exclusively using it for testing athletes. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of information available. Roger mentioned the old Jörg Feldman forums. I used to scour those things looking for information and trying to interpret his cryptic messages. And a lot of what I was doing at the time was trying to understand what athletes, I call them rate limiting energetic factors. So I come from an endurance background. I used to care a lot about VO2 max. You'd always ask your buddies out, what's your VO2? But the issue with something like VO2 max is that it's actually not a practical measurement. VO2 is like a measuring stick. But you might go and you'd say, oh, my VO2 max is 74 milliliters per kilogram per minute. And then one of my coaches would send me that and say, Coach, what do we do now? And I'd say, we do nothing, because we don't know why what's your VO2 max is. What was your rate limiting factor? Why isn't your VO2 max 77 milliliters per kilogram per minute? And what Moxy allows us to do, for one, is understanding what is the rate limiting factor for your VO2 max. So traditionally, we would think of VO2 max as the total amount of oxygen consumed in the working muscle. But I really there's a researcher named David Poole, and in the 90s, he published a paper where he proposed that we make an affordance of the term VO2 max, and he proposes that we reconceptualize VO2 max is the maximum integrated capacity of the pulmonary, cardiovascular, and muscular system to uptake, transport, and utilize oxygen. And these are what a lot of Moxy users will call respiratory delivery and utilization limitations. So a lot of what I was doing with Moxy at first is trying to identify as an athlete most limited by their respiratory system, their ability to deliver oxygen to the working muscle, or their ability to consume oxygen in the working muscle. Because if they're limited by their ability to use oxygen in the working muscle, for example, and I'm training to improve their cardiac output or their diaphragm muscle fatigue, I'm not going to be doing the best job at getting this athlete's performance better. So what I would first do is I would try and identify it. And then the second thing that I started using Moxy for is seeing, well, how do we train these athletes strategically? If I know this individual is limited by their rate of oxygen utilization, how do I improve that from week to week, month to month, year to year? So this is where we would look at the research that was available, the applied literature, and you would think, okay, well, if I improve an athlete's mitochondrial density, they're getting more total mitochondria in the muscle, that should improve their oxygen utilization. So we would pick one of those protocols from the literature, have an athlete do it every week. I tortured some athletes years ago. I would literally have people do the same workout every Tuesday for 6 months straight just to see what would happen. And I would do that to myself as well. And see, okay, well, if I'm testing this, am I improving their rate of utilization week to week? And we could track these things with Moxy, and then we would start to parse out what kind of protocols are effective. Thankfully, over the past 6 years, I've gone from guinea pigging people on site in Atlanta and guinea pigging myself to now I have athletes around the world using Moxy, so I could refine these concepts a lot more. And over time, we've added other use cases like using it for load management and the return to play process. using it for hypertrophy training for individualizing exercise selection. So there's a lot of different potential applications. And what personally excites me is I think we've just kind of touched the tip of the iceberg. So I'm sure if we talk in 2 years from now, we'll probably have a dozen other ways that we could use these devices. Now that guys like yourself are using it too, I don't think it's been used in fighting. Maybe we find something cool and interesting.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this, to be honest. I told Roger when we were on our meeting call, I like to win, right? So if I'm going to use something that I know that is going to give me a definitive answer onto, okay, this is what we need to do, and we're going to do this to get better. And that's usually what any coach wants for every athlete, right? So with that, Roger, can not just a coach, but an athlete actually utilize this technology by themselves? You think that they have the ability to do so, or will they need somebody like an Evan that can run them through it? I think that, I'm just going to speak for myself. Looking at it, it may look a little bit intimidating for an athlete, but I don't think it's that complex for an athlete to actually utilize on his own. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think we definitely have athletes that use it without trainers. They're people that dive in and understand their physiology. It's not going to tell you how many pounds to put on your barbell. You still have to figure that out yourself. Yeah. But for certain things like interval training, or even knowing when to start and stop your reps, and then how long to recover in between sets, things like that. Definitely an athlete can use on their own with a bit of study. They'd have to and then also understanding, learning to apply what their goals are to what they're seeing for the stress in their muscle systems. So yeah, we definitely have people do that. I think the science is young yet. It's still developing rapidly, and I think. I love it when people work with Evan, because Evan can get people up to speed faster. But for the more complex things, I think that's a great way to go. But certainly people can use it on their own as well. Yeah.
So Evan has his own certification, or I should say workshop and seminar series that he does for Moxie. Is that correct, Evan?
Yeah, so it's a course called The Science and Practice of Performance Enhancement with an Ear. So essentially what I'm doing in this course is I'm trying to give you the quick up to speed to explain the relevant physiology that you would want to understand to be able to use Moxie. So explaining some of the bioenergetics, explaining the basics of muscle physiology. Then each section is a different use case for Moxie. So we cover a whole section on strength and hypertrophy training, energy system training, mathematical modeling of performance, load management, and then a whole section on assessments. And because the platform that we host this course on allows it to be updated over time, so I'm always adding new use cases in and adding new case studies. So it's very much a growing and evolving course.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I'm looking forward to utilizing it a lot with my fighters, and we can work on that, get some testing done. Going to the lab on Tuesday, Evan, so I'll be in contact, and we'll see how we do. But yeah, I highly recommend that course. If you guys are listening, I'm in it myself. It's definitely something, it's an eye-opener from the original models that we've thought of in the past, from alactic, anaerobic, aerobic. Evan pretty much shits on them and basically shuts them away and makes us feel really dumb. No, I'm just kidding. But honestly, it's a new way of thinking, and it's a lot more, I would say it's more simple, right? In a sense?
I would say initially it seems more complex, but one of the things that I've really found is it seems more complex when we're taught these outdated models. But when I've started working with coaches who have never learned any physiology at all, it's more intuitive, and it actually makes a lot more sense at face value. So if people are intimidated, they're like, I'm not an exercise physiologist, or I've never taken biochemistry. You're in great hands, because I actually think you're in a better place than if you have undergrad in exercise science and you've taught some of these models that we're trying to overturn.
Yeah, I've seen that myself so many times. The people with the PhDs struggle more than people who haven't they don't have to unload the baggage first.
Yeah.
You know, the people that have been doing it for a long time struggle more than new people. And then the other thing what really helps people get it fast is just using it. Just put it on and see the data. And because you can start working harder and you see your SMO2 go down, and you stop and you see it come back up. You're getting the feedback loop is so fast because you can see the data while you're doing it. Then that really helps. So the people that are super successful with it are the ones that put it on and just observe. And then because you're getting that feedback so quickly, you can really learn it quickly.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I know I'm going to get this question. Is it available globally, right? It's not just available in the US or in Canada. It's available everywhere. Is that correct?
Yep. We've shipped sensors to everywhere. So from our website, or we have a few places we have some partners, but just get a hold of us on the website and we can get it to you. Great.
And like I said, I highly recommend Evan's course if you are going to get a Moxie, especially if you're a coach. Definitely check that out. Now, as far as this Kickstarter program that we have going on, can you explain a little bit more, Roger, what that is and how it's going to benefit the athlete and coach?
Yep. So in the past, up to this point, we have always used third-party software to display our data. So when we started the company, we didn't have a huge amount of money. So we said, all right, focus all our efforts on the sensor. Make the sensor good. Make that work. Make it accurate. Make that as good as we can. And then rather than making an app, we said, well, we'll just, we don't have enough money, so we'll work with these third-party people. So we worked with Peripedal and Perf Pro, and it's been great. The especially in endurance sports, that's worked really well. And then we also work with Garmin's, so we can send our data to a Garmin wristwatch, and that also works great for endurance sports. But where we started to run into a gap was in the strength and conditioning space. Anytime you're in a gym, lifting weights, you don't want to use a Garmin. You typically have a Garmin, and using a laptop. Evan's been doing it for a long time, using a laptop, and that's how you're going to get started here. But using a laptop isn't that nice, and so we just started a Kickstarter to develop what we're calling Moxie Portal, and this will really streamline the data collection and the sharing of the data. So it consists of an app which will run on Android and iOS, and that'll collect data from the sensors, and that'll just run on your phone or a tablet. And then that'll send data to a cloud system where the data can be stored. And then there's a web tool where the trainer can analyze the data and then provide feedback to the athlete through that web tool. And then one cool thing is it's going to do this in real time. So the trainer can be seeing the athlete's data while they're working out, and it'll do that over the internet. So you don't even need to be in the same room. You can be providing feedback remotely, and especially now with the COVID and all that, that'd be a nice feature. But even if you're in a gym where you got several athletes training at once, you can toggle around to their different athletes and see their data while they're working out.
Yeah, it's really good for big groups, teams. I also see it going to be really good for people and coaches that have remote clients, remote athletes. I know Evan works with some remote athletes. I do too as well. So I think that this is definitely going to change the outcome of everything, and also help it streamline and get people ready when they don't have access to or they can't have their laptop out in the gym, and I can't imagine having a laptop out in my gym. It'll probably get smashed by one of my guys just walking around, because they're just meatheads and they just bump into stuff. So, yeah. But, all right, guys. So anything else do you want to say about Moxie and where we see the vision going further on down the line? We're talking 5-10 years. We can start with Evan.
And so I'm notoriously bad at predicting where things go in the future. So where I really see it going is, I think, having more coaches doing hands-on data collection, trying to think about different use cases. That's what really excites me. Up until now, of course, there are people in the strength and conditioning world using it, and I've really seen a big boom in the professional sport world over the past 2 to 3 years. I know NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL coaches using these technologies. It's even integrated into training for special forces soldiers. In the more of these use cases, or the more sports that we see, the more use cases that we see generated. So if we could get fighters using this and skiers using it and table tennis players, anyone that's doing serious training, we're going to learn new ways to use this technology and new ways to capture and analyze data. So that's something that really excites me, because I've been involved in research in some capacity for years. And the issue for me has always been translating research. A lot of the things that we could do in a lab just aren't really that useful when we get players out on the field or out on the court or in the fighting ring. And Moxie is something, it's a research grade device. I've published papers using Moxie, but it's also very easy for us to use as coaches. So I think we could really marry those two things more and do it better. And I'm just excited to see where that goes. And I think this portal will give us a lot of new options for doing that. And personally, I'm happy to not bring my laptop everywhere.
I can hear you. I hear you on that one. Roger.
So I think the portal is going to be just make it incredibly more accessible to more people. Because right now it's been these early adopter people like Evan that were willing to understand the Jürg Feldman forum and put up with using laptops. But that's, that is being overcome. But then I think Evan's course this is the first time anyone has written that down in a really systematic way. There's been bits and pieces of this have existed previously. And I think this is this is a moment in time when now this becomes accessible to people that don't have the time or the inclination to really dive in as deep as what Evan had. Now, I mean, it's still not stupid simple. I mean, you're still dealing with human physiology, and it's complicated from that perspective. But I think it's so much more accessible to trainers at a practical level. And so I think we're just going to see a continued growth of people using it in the applications like you're looking at. And then the other thing we're seeing a lot of is just use in education. So many of these things, like first we have to correct the education. That a lot of the textbooks still have the wrong energy systems in there, but that's happening. It'll occur over time. But new exercise physiologists are coming out right now, and they're still being taught wrong. But that's starting to change. We're starting to see benefits there. But when people are able to use this when they're getting educated in their skill or in their profession of exercise science or becoming a trainer, then I think this will just become more and more mainstream. So it's and this course that Evan has developed, this he just published this in the last 6 months or so. And that I really view as a huge turning point in the use of the technology. I kind of liken it to in 2006, there was a book published called Training and Racing with a Power Meter, and that was for cyclists. And prior to that, no one used a power meter, really, only a few, obscure people. But then after that, then we were on this path of now everybody in the Tour de France has power meters. It's like 100% now. But that took decades. But we're probably right at that point where now somebody has written down a systematic way of using this, and it'll continue to get better. Evan's not done. He's going to come up with a lot more great stuff. But I think this is a really nice starting point that he's got laid out now.
Roger, to your point, I know some physiologists who have been in the game for decades, and a lot of them have told me about in the late 70s, early 80s, when this new crazy thing came out called heart rate monitoring. And they always talk about how it was this huge breakthrough, and there were so many people at the time who didn't want to use heart rate monitoring because they said this is too far, it's too technical, no one's ever going to understand heart rate monitoring, and it's not going to take off. So they didn't take the time to learn how to measure heart rate. Now we're sitting here and we're like, a heart rate monitor? Really? That's a technological innovation? Everyone knows how to use a heart rate monitor. I really think muscle oxygen saturation monitoring is going to be similar, where right now, years back, the first Moxie Summit that I went to or attended, everyone there, like these Moxie power users, we had scientists from Red Bull there and Nike there and different pro sport teams, and Andre Feldman presented. And now you see the number of people and the diversity of users presenting at these summits really starting to spread out. And on a weekly basis, I talk to coaches that have no formal training in exercise science or physiology, and they're using these devices. So I think the longer this goes on, the more we're going to see this becoming more of like a homogenized thing where it's not thought of as some niche product. It's no different than heart rate monitoring. When we're measuring heart rate, what are we trying to understand? Trying to understand oxygen kinetics. Why don't we just measure that directly?
Yeah. Yeah, the same with lactate. I think people have measured lactate for so long, but they measured lactate because they wanted to know muscle oxygen, and that's actually been a detriment to the adoption of the technology. A lot of people were trying to correlate muscle oxygen data with lactate readings, and it's like, well, that's backwards. You measured lactate because NIRS hadn't been invented yet, and lactate was possible to measure, but it's much more confusing to interpret lactate data than what it is to interpret the muscle oxygen data.
Yeah, and I think what's often not appreciated is that there's a time lag with lactate measurements. When you're pulling blood lactate samples, if you're taking it from a fingertip or from an earlobe, if it's being produced in your leg, it needs to travel all the way there, which could take 3 minutes. So you might even be missing the mark a little bit.
Yeah.
With the devices now, I know Evan probably talked about this, hit on this in the past, but where you put it, like say vastus lateralis or let's say the opposite side delt, I have 3 monitors here. Now I'm gonna put them where is the best place to start with?
The starting point is the large working muscle. So whatever is producing the power for what you're doing. And so the muscle that's going to be using the most energy it would be the starting point. But then it depends on what you want to accomplish. So if you're monitoring intensity, that's a great place to go. The large working muscle, you're monitoring fatigue, looking at recovery, those kinds of things. You always want to be on that large working muscle. So if a cyclist or a runner, it's often the vastus lateralis. It's going to, with the combat sports, I don't know the answer to that. I think that's something that you and Evan are going to have to work on because it's
I got an idea.
Not obvious to me right off the bat. But then I'm sure Evan has some much more advanced thoughts on that.
So, Evan, with the placement of the Moxy, right? This is going to measure global, like SMO2 and things of that nature. It's not just going to measure local muscular endurance, right?
So muscular endurance specifically, that's a little bit more of a complicated one, because when we say muscular endurance, it's like, well, why do you have a lack of muscular endurance? That could be a localized issue, or that could be a systemic issue. Yeah. So we could actually use Moxy to even parse that out. One of the things that will be interesting when we start talking about how you're going to use your monitors is that you have 3 of them. Yeah. So that gives us a lot of options. Let's say we're doing something really simple, and one of your athletes, we put them on like a spin bike. It's a lower body dominant activity. So we could put a Moxy on their right vastus lateralis, on their left vastus lateralis, and we could get side-to-side changes. If there are any, I'm assuming because you're working with fighters, these guys are getting kicked and they're getting injuries. A lot of them are getting knee surgeries. You might see some significant side-to-side discrepancies, which is a whole nother conversation. But assuming they're equal on both sides, we could also pop one on a delt. And I almost think of the delt as like a grounding measurement, because your delt shouldn't be doing anything when you're cycling. So we could think of that as a proxy for systemic changes. So imagine your guy's gone, he's working really hard on this bike, and all of a sudden you see him starting to cut off blood flow to the muscles in the upper body. Like, what's going on right now? Well, this is where if we have some physiology know-how, and these are things we cover in the course, you're like, well, why would a cyclist be cutting off blood to his upper body? That doesn't really make sense. And we could start to think about this relationship between what's called metabolic vasodilation and sympathetic vasoconstriction. It's like this tug of war that's always happening, where there's local metabolic factors that want to open up your blood vessels, and there's the brain wanting to clamp down on your blood vessels, and they're playing this tug of war with one another. So what we might be able to do is parse out that, well, your athlete's limited by their cardiac output, and having too much vasodilation in the non-working muscle groups is threatening their arterial blood pressure. So the best way for them to optimize blood flow to their lower body and get more blood delivered there is to restrict blood flow elsewhere. Versus you might see the opposite. You might see that all of a sudden you're getting these huge spikes in blood volume in the non-working muscles, and they're starting to desaturate. In that case, we might be creating a systemic limitation where there's excess CO2 buildup, and CO2 is a vasodilator. So there's all these different applications. One of the ones that I like, if you're working with an athlete who's pretty lean, you could even affix the Moxy right between the 7th and 8th intercostal, and you can look at the respiratory muscles working and desaturating. You could put a Moxy on the quad and the vastus lateralis and the rectus femoris, and you can see changes in recruitment as an athlete fatigues. So we have so many different options that you could use. So for me, I'm always thinking like, what are we actually testing someone for?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
that's how I determine where we put the sensors.
I think that would be good to get feedback just off of experience. You know, with the fighters, you're looking at like, all right, first I'm gonna ask them, what do they feel the most when they are super fatigued, especially like in a fight, right? Whether it be their legs giving out, whether it be their shoulders giving out, then maybe we pop those on those particular muscle groups and figure out what's going on from there. For instance, like me, Evan, you know that I had an ACL tear. So I just got that. I had a surgery about 5 months ago. So that right there, we can pop that on the right side where the knee surgery was. Maybe go rectus and then vastus lateralis on that right knee that I got surgery on, and then see what's going on from that perspective. Because just off of feel, right? I'm seeing more muscle, or I'm feeling more muscle activation and more blood flow being distributed to the left leg as opposed to the right leg, and the left leg's getting blown up. I'm getting more overall vasodilation and maybe some occlusion there in the left side over the right side. But yeah, this is interesting. There's so many things that we could do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm gonna let you guys go, but Roger, tell them where they can get the Moxy.
Just go to moxymonitor.com. It's moxymonitor.com. So that's our website. You can get to pretty much anything you need from there. There's a banner at the top of that page that'll link to our Kickstarter page. And now if you're interested in getting a Moxy, now is a great time. Get on that Kickstarter page. The price is a little bit less, and then you'd get in on that Moxy portal right away. It's a great time to jump on a sensor if you want to do that, and that's open until March 2nd, I think.
Cool, perfect. Evan, you got anything?
No, I think that's pretty much everything I was going to add as well. And for people that are interested too, right now is also a really good time, because if they do get the Moxy sensor through the Kickstarter campaign, they'll get the course that I made for free. So if they want to hear my voice for another 8 hours, that's an option for them as well.
Yeah, that's another awesome time to jump in, because you get that course. So this is a great deal on the Kickstarter. We're hoping to get that pushed over the edge so we can build that Moxy portal.
So Moxy, Kickstarter, make sure you guys get on it. Again, another great episode. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And also, if you aren't, give me a rating on it, and I'll see you again next time. Hopefully we'll bring these guys back for another episode. See you again next time.